Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unhindered Faith. And we're going to continue in this series, The Lies We Believe. And this is episode 3 of this series. And let me start with this question. Have you ever looked at someone God was using and thought, I can never do that? You know, maybe you've said things like, I'm not qualified, or I don't know enough, or I've made too many mistakes, or God could never use someone like me. And if you've ever believed that, you're not alone. In fact, almost every person in Scripture wrestled with those same thoughts. And today we're exposing another lie that keeps countless believers on the sidelines. That lie is this: God can't use someone like me. And we're replacing it with a truth, and that truth is this: God doesn't call perfect people. Let me say that again. God doesn't call perfect people. He transforms willing people. One of the greatest victories, the enemy's greatest victories, isn't convincing Christians to stop believing. It's convincing them that they have nothing to offer. If Satan can get you to believe you're unqualified, you'll never step into what God has prepared for you. You'll never spend your life you'll spend the rest of your life watching others instead of obeying God's will. I want you to listen to what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27 through 29. He says this: "But God chose foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." Did you catch that? God didn't accidentally use ordinary people. He intentionally chose them. Why? So everyone would know the glory belongs to Him. I love that. Because God has always used imperfect people. Think about the people God chose. You got Moses, a murderer who said, I can't speak. You got David, a overlooked shepherd boy who later committed adultery and arranged a murder. You have Rahab, who was a prostitute. You have Peter, the disciple who denied Jesus. You have Paul, a man who persecuted Christians before becoming one. And if God only used perfect people, the Bible would actually be a pretty short book to read. You know, instead, it's filled with broken people like you and me who surrendered to an extraordinary God. Now that's encouraging, because it means your imperfections don't disqualify you. So why do we keep believing they do? You see, we focus on our ability instead of God's power. When God called Moses, Moses didn't argue about God's ability. He argued about his own. He said, who am I? What if they don't believe me? I can't speak well. You know, notice what God never says. He never says, you know what, you're right, Moses. You're amazing. Instead, he says, I will be with you. That's the answer. That to the question has never been, are you enough? The question has always been, is God enough? And he always is. You know, there's been moments in my own life where when I've completely felt unqualified, whether if it was stepping into ministry or preaching messages or accepting new leadership responsibilities. I've had moments where I question whether I was the right person. And I've thought, surely God could find someone more qualified and more gifted. But over time, I've learned something. I've learned that God isn't looking for someone who has everything figured out. He's looking for someone who's willing to say yes. And I've watched Him use my weaknesses far more than my strengths. Not because I'm capable, it's because He's faithful. You know, availability is always greater than ability. You know, one of my favorite sayings is God isn't looking for ability as much as He's looking for availability. Think about Isaiah. When God asked, "Whom shall I send?" Isaiah didn't respond with a resume. He didn't have his list of accomplishments or anything like that. He didn't list qualifications. He simply said, "Here am I, send me. Here am I, send me." God can develop your gifts. He can grow your confidence. He can teach you what you don't know, but he can't use a heart that's unwilling. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply saying, "Yes, Lord." And here's what I love most. Your weakness becomes God's stage. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, he says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." We usually try to hide weaknesses, and God often chooses to display his strength through them. Why? Because when people look at your life, they're reminded that this couldn't have happened without Jesus. That's why your weakness doesn't disqualify you. It actually creates room for God's power. So let me ask you something. What's the excuse you've been using? Is it, "I'm too old, I'm too young, I don't know enough, I've made too many mistakes, someone else can do it better"? What if those thoughts aren't humility, which we use those thoughts and say, "Man, I'm just staying humble," right? But what if those thoughts aren't humility? What if they're lies keeping you from obedience? Because God has never asked you to be perfect. He simply asked you to trust him. And today it's time to replace another lie. So here's the lie. God can't use someone like me. And here's the truth that we're replacing that lie with. God delights in using ordinary people who are willing to trust him. Your past doesn't disqualify you. Your weaknesses don't disqualify you. Your fears don't disqualify you. If anything, they become a backdrop for God's grace. So this week, instead of focusing on everything that you lack, focus on the God who has promised to be with you. Because when God calls you, he also equips you. If this message encouraged you today, would you do me a favor and would you share it with someone who's been doubting whether God could use them? And I would love to hear in the comments below, where have you seen God use your weakness to display his strength? Now, next week, we're tackling another lie that people quietly believe, and it's this: I'm alone. I'm alone. Until then, stop believing the lies, start believing the truth, and keep living with unhindered faith.